I am Lou Berger. I have with me Kent and Joel. Would you mind saying hello?
Good morning, evening, everybody. This is Kent.
Good morning.
Yeah, we appreciate everyone adapting to this rapidly changing and unique in our lifetime event. And I'm not sure we have much more to say on that. There's been enough of the discussion on the list. We're going to try to focus on our agenda, which is a bit, I'd say, abbreviated because of this being an interim. Let's click. So this is still an IETF meeting. And as with all formal IETF meetings, when you participate, you agree to our processes and our disclosure requirements. If you're not familiar with the note well, please go read about it on the IETF page. I suspect that any people who are taking the trouble to call in are well versed in this. So this is quite different than one of our normal in-person meetings, but it's not too different from another interim or other interims, although we do expect it to turn into something that might be a bit larger. For that reason, we're asking that the chat window on WebEx be limited to queue control. So if you want to enter the queue, please say +Q, and then wait for the chairs to identify you and say you can speak. And if you want to leave without being called on, just do -Q. Also, please mute your mics. Right now, we're not enforcing that, but if except for a couple of call-in people, we explicitly muted you because you weren't doing it on your own. If things get too noisy, we'll change how we're working that. But right now, everyone has their own mute control. Blue sheets. This is definitely different than an in-person meeting. Please go to Etherpad, which is in the chat window, and click on that link and add your name to the bottom of the Etherpad. Please be careful not to delete other people's names. You can. We do have histories. We can go back and figure out who's there. So if you see someone you don't like being there, that won't really help. But please make sure to add your name at the bottom. And once you're there, please stay there and please help take some notes. We are on Jabber, so if you would like to type something, you can. We'll do our best to monitor that and to chime in. Was that one of my co-chairs? Okay.
No, I didn't say anything, but we're going to go to minutes. You just mentioned minutes. If everyone, when they go to Etherpad, in the upper right-hand corner of Etherpad, where you see a bunch of color boxes, select that and type your name against your color that you've been assigned, and that way we can sort of identify who's taking the minutes in the Etherpad after the fact.
Actually, even better, type your name at the top of the page, and that'll put it in that color. So right now on line 7, if you just put your name, that will identify you. Oops, went a little too far. Apparently. Okay. Our agenda is notably without times. We think we have enough time to make it through all these topics, but we've weighted the agenda with the key working group items at the front, and we want to make sure that they have sufficient time. We do think that we're going to make it through the whole agenda, and if we're lucky, even less than the 2 hours we're scheduled for. Computer seems to be having a little trouble here. Okay. As many probably have noticed, we have adopted a nice set of documents from the Yang modeling and versioning design team. And this is really an important piece of, represents an important piece of work. It's filling a really important gap in our foundational technologies. And the design team has given us a starting point. And we really want to acknowledge that they have worked hard to get us to this point. That doesn't mean that we don't all together have more work to do. We absolutely do. And, you know, as the adoption call showed, there's definitely some rough patches still to go through. But we really want to acknowledge every person who contributed to that. That includes the formal design team members and also other people who commented either publicly or privately. So we really appreciate that hard work and want to acknowledge the whole team and including the lead, but every person that contributed to that effort. So thank you all so much. It did take a while, but you know, hard problems sometimes take a while to work through. So clap, clap. So where do we stand since the last meeting? And this is the last IETF meeting. We have a nice block of documents in the editor's queue. So thank you all who contributed to that process and to the IESG for getting those into the editor queue. Hopefully they'll come out pretty quickly. We have one document that is, I think is actually blocked by the AD. So Rob, here's something new for your plate. And we also have one document that is not on the agenda. If there's a document editor here, please do or author who wants to say anything, please jump into the queue. I also note that Warren is in queue. So Warren, would you like to say something?
Thank you. Just want to let folk know that I just assigned the draft IETF NETMOD factory default to Rob. I had just been sort of carrying it as a proxy. But now that he's all official, figured he should be the official owner.
Thank you so much, and you know, really thank you for helping.
You went suddenly really quiet. Nobody can hear you.
Can you hear me? Hello.
You sound okay to me.
Oh.
Rob, I'm sorry. Warren, how does my voice?
Also really quiet. So I guess something broke with my audio. I'll fix it. Thank you. Sorry all.
Sure, thanks. I was just saying, Warren, thanks for helping and get these documents into the queue. I know you assisted and really appreciate it. Balazs?
Balazs, please unmute.
Balazs, apparently your microphone is not working properly. I don't know if you just want to type your comment into Jabber and one of us can read it.
Carry on.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so Balazs was making a comment that the document is, they're working on it, and it's past working group last call, and I think that's all he wanted to say. We have no liaisons or communications that have come in, and I believe that's our last slide. And with that, I'm going to attempt to switch over to the design team. And I'm going to correct myself. It's not the design team. It's now the working group document authors. So the first document up is the solution overview.
Can people hear me?
You sound good.
Okay, great. So I'll try and keep this fairly short because I think the meat of the substances in the other drafts and things. But so you could go to the next slide, please. So the agenda here is I'm going to give a quick solution overview. I've presented this before, but I'm just trying to set the scene for everyone else if the other drafts have been discussed. I'll also give a very one-slide update on the requirements update and also quickly discuss what the sort of author next steps are here, what's planned. That's still open for discussion for other people, so we're looking for input. Okay, next steps, please. So to recap, we've adopted, I think, is it 7 drafts maybe? I'm trying to think. The 5 meaty ones here are the ones listed here. So there's a module revision handling, and that's the ones discussing effectively notifying MPC changes between module revisions. It allows revision labels to be associated with revisions and allows a branch revision history if that's required. Doesn't mandate or encourage that, but allows it. On top of that, one of the possible revision label schemes that has been proposed is a module semantic version number scheme. In fact, actually, I think the module should be taken out of that. It's just a Yang semantic version number scheme because the proposal is that same scheme could also be used for packages as well. And this is a scheme that's based on SEMVer 200 but extended to allow fixes in older revisions effectively, and is one, in fact, the recommended revision label that we're suggesting should be used for Yang modules, but others can be used. The third one is Yang packages, and that's looking at the schema level rather than for individual modules. So it's providing information that's somewhat similar to what's in Yang library, but it allows, it's defined in like a hierarchical way. So packages can import other packages to build up Yang schema. And again, those Yang schema can be used off the box to describe what the schema is that a device is using ahead of time, as well as being able to download that at the time as well. And the idea here again is that by allowing the information to be sorry, I can hear someone else.
Yeah, try to mute everybody.
Okay. So the idea with Yang packages is, again, once you've got an offline definition, then rather than having to download Yang library, you can potentially just download the package reference and know that the device is conformant with the schema that you support. The fourth draft here is protocol operations for version selection. So this is again sort of building on Yang packages and is offering a solution for how devices can support backwards compatible and non-backwards compatible changes to the schema. So it allows devices to potentially support multiple different versions of a schema and to allow clients to choose which version of a schema that they want to use. And the idea of this draft is to allow quite a lot of flexibility in how devices decide to support schema selection. So they may only support a single schema or they may support multiple schemes at the same time. And then the last draft here is Yang schema comparison tooling. So this is a way of effectively defining algorithms to compare either Yang schema or just individual Yang modules. So even in the sort of conversations we've had about Yang version number schemes, they can't cover you can't describe all changes easily in a single version number. It's quite a crude mechanism to describe what's changed. Eventually, you need to be able to compare the schemas to be able to see what's actually changed. And the idea here is to actually define what those algorithms are and to provide tools that actually provide that comparison. So I know that Pyang provides some of this comparison. I don't know if it's entirely complete or whether anything needs to be changed there, but that's the sort of idea that's going on. So on top of these 5 drafts, there's also a requirements draft that is defining what the requirements are we're meeting, and a solution overview draft that just sort of ties these 5 drafts together and defines how they fit together. Next slide, please. So this diagram is just sort of showing you sort of dependencies between the drafts, how they work together. You can see that the module revision handling is the base draft. On top of that, we've got the optional semantic versioning scheme that can be used with that, and the packages version schema draft that makes use of the module revision handling. So those 3 sort of fit together. Then on top of that, you have the package version selection that makes use of Yang packages to choose those, and you have the schema comparison tooling that makes use of the different module versioning and packages and the schema revision scheme. So that diagram describes how these things fit together. Next slide, please. So I mentioned briefly there's a requirements and solution overview draft. The requirements draft is stable, it hasn't changed. There are questions here to the working group as to whether we should try and take this to informational RFC. At the moment, the author's opinion, I think, is that probably it would be helpful to take this to RFC because, as an informational RFC, because the solution documents reference this. So that's our current take, but we wanted to raise that with the working group to see if anyone had any opinions. Similarly, there's a solution overview draft, again, which will be informational, with the idea that it just sort of ties the different aspects of the solution together and explains how they fit together. Again, the same question is, do we aim to take this to informational RFC? And again, the preference of the authors is that, yes, it's helpful to do so. So I don't know if I'll wait for a moment to see if anyone wants to comment on this now, or otherwise we can take this to the list.
Hi, Rob. This is Kent as chair. We don't have the ability to do hums very well in a virtual meeting, and this is the kind of thing that I would like to get the sense of the room for. So as a best fallback position, perhaps we'll take it to the list. Okay.
And as an AD, the next IETF is quite likely to be virtual again. That's my supposition. But possibly we'll try and invest in some mechanism to do hums then. So again, this decision could potentially be the next.
We have the list. You know, the list is great for people being able to say +1. So you know, I think we have a good mechanism for it if we have to do it virtually. As asking a question to you as co-author and also to the other co-authors, do you have a feeling on timeline of when you would want to proceed process these documents to submit to the IESG for publication?
I would assume that we try and publish. I don't think we need to rush either of these documents. I think the requirements documents we could just hold until we've got further with the solution drafts and we're sure as a working group that we are on the right track. The solution overview draft, I think that all the other solution drafts would have a normative reference to this. And as such, I think it will end up being held up in the processing queue anyway. So again, I think that we would try and progress that at the same time as some of the solution drafts. But that does raise an interesting question coming up on the next slide.
Okay, I think that sounds very reasonable to hold off until we actually are ready on the solution documents to progress those. That's a pretty typical pattern. I think we have Joe Clark in queue.
Thanks. This is Joe Clark. Can you everyone hear me?
You sound good.
Excellent. Version requirements. I think they're fairly stable. We've had them in there for a while. In fact, the last cycle, it was pretty much just a bump from expiring. We didn't make any substantive changes. I think the working group has agreed that these are the requirements of a solution. One now, put it through like a working group and try to push that one forward and wait, like Rob said, on the solution overview.
Anyone else want to jump in here? All right, I think we can have. Oh, see, Italo has jumped in. Go ahead, Italo.
Thank you. I have a question for information about this schema. Is it already supported by the tools, or in other words, can we start using this solution in when we develop other modules in other working groups, or we have to wait for a while?
In terms of the solution, no, there's not support in Pyang for like Yang packages yet. In terms of like the schema comparison, some of that's there. And again, I don't think there's support for the other things in the draft yet.
Thanks.
So back to Joe's question, I think the chairs can have a discussion on it, and either perhaps go forward with either something informal or formal based on where the other chairs are. I can't speak for them.
Okay. Next slide, please. So the next steps, so yes, as Lou's mentioned, the design team is officially complete. I would also like to thank everyone on the design team for all their work in this effort. The next steps is that the authors would like to meet on a regular basis to progress this work. So I assume that, or hope these will be weekly or meetings effectively. The meetings will be open to all, everyone can join them. We will try and carry substantive discussions and things on the lists, and keep the working group fully in the loop. The current time slot for those weekly meetings are Tuesday at 2 p.m. UK time. That can possibly change if there are people who are interested in participating, and effectively want to keep this as open as possible. So I would like there potentially be an alias that we use for this for the authors, because we'll be discussing multiple drafts at the same time. So I need to close that with Lou to check that that's okay. But yes, so that's the sort of proposal. In addition to that, we would like to try and phase the document delivery. We would like to try and concentrate on the module versioning, Yanks and the packages as a first block, and then have the version selection and schema comparison to follow. And the aim here is simply to try and get all the members of the working group able to focus on those drafts and potentially progress those more easily and more quickly, get to those to a working group last call stage before picking up more detailed discussion on the version selection and schema comparison. So I'm not trying to block any discussion on those other drafts now. I'm sure we'll have those, but I think we would quite like to try and to prioritize those 3 drafts if that is acceptable to the working group and the chairs. That makes sense. Any questions?
From my personal perspective, as long as things don't get so out of sync that by the time we get to the sort of second set that there isn't a solution for the second set. That can sometimes happen, is you end up with a base set that doesn't allow for support of some other capability. So as long as we don't end up in that case, I think it's fine.
And so a question for you, Lou, is an option here to take the first 3 to working group last call, but then effectively to hold them at that state so that we don't take them any further until we're sure that the other 2 drafts have solutions effectively. So to try and focus on the first ones, but not take them any further. And then if we need to come back to those, if that's required to get a full solution, we can do so.
That sounds like a completely reasonable approach. I think we can revisit it once we're ready for last call on those, but that does seem very reasonable to me.
That's all I had.
All right, thanks, Rob. Lou, next is Rashad.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys wanted to make a comment on what I just said.
No, I agree.
Okay, great. Rob, I would like to recognize you for leading the design team and now walking the line between transitioning from just a contributor to RAD. So appreciate the managing all that.
Yes. And congratulations for becoming AD. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Rashad. I'm going to be presenting the module versioning draft on behalf of all the authors listed here. I'm hoping you can hear me well.
Yes, can hear you well, thank you.
Next slide, please. So this is a recap of the module versioning draft. This was the same slide was presented at previous IETFs. The top two enhancements which are mentioned there, those are basically the crux, the main stuff provided by this draft. that we're first allowing nonlinear module development, also known as branching. And secondly, it allows us to document when non-backwards compatible changes have occurred in revision history, what we basically call NBC in lots of the drafts. Revision date is still there, but we allow an optional text label, which we call revision label, to be associated with the revision. The label could be Semver-based, or it could be a different scheme. For those who remember, there used to be one draft and they were split into two drafts. The Semver stuff was taken to a separate draft, which will be presented a little bit later. There's been addition of the import by revision date or derived to allow us to import to say, you know, I want something from, for example, 2.0.0 as an example. We define what backwards compatible and non-backwards compatible changes are. There's some clarifications regarding Yang status handling, and we've refreshed the guidelines for updating Yang modules. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to be going through some of the main issues which have been raised during the adoption call. All the issues are tracked in GitHub. So this probably is the issue which has raised the most discussions on the list, lots of healthy discussion. The comment which was made was that the full revision history is enough, and that therefore this is not needed. The authors believe that this is helpful because in many cases it allows you to not have to go through the full revision history to figure out whether two modules are backwards compatible or not. The other point I made on the list, there's kind of two questions. The first question is, you know, whether IETF modules must use revision labels which conform to Yang Semver. And the other question is, you know, whether Yang Semver is useful for other publishers of Yang modules, for example, vendors. But that point here, which was raised, was specific to the IETF modules. The discussion is still ongoing on the list from various people, so that's good. Next, further discussion needed. Really hope to be hearing from many people from the working group, and fire away the questions. If there's no question on this.
Hi, Rashad. This is Kent as chair. I think the question is, so the draft is adopted, but the status, the intended status currently is proposed standard. Potentially it could get moved to experimental. Whether or not that makes sense is something we need to determine consensus for over time. I mean, right now, I guess the question is, are these altering opinions in the rough, you know, like for an IETF term in the rough, or is there actually, do we not have consensus? And so we need to determine that. And so we'll figure that out as we go forward.
I'll say I don't think we have consensus here either. You know, from my perspective as one of the chairs, is I think it's very important for us to come up with a standards track solution. Now, certainly, if the working group thinks it's not mature enough to be a proposed standards, experimental is better than nothing. We have a few people in the queue, so
Go first.
Hopefully this microphone is a little bit better. Ken, I think you're referring to your email, as I recall, was experimental for the Yang Semver draft, not the Yang module versioning. But I think this issue crosses the boundary between both. I'm going to talk a little bit about this issue as well from a different perspective in my presentation. I just want to be clear on what we're talking about, because I do bring up I don't bring up the intended status yet, but I bring up, again, should IETF modules, or must IETF modules have a revision label that is a Yang Semver? I think that's the crux of the question to answer, and then that could help dictate the module intended, or sorry, the draft intended status.
Yes, you're right.
Rob, did we skip you in queue? Rob will.
To the queue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So-
My eyes.
And Jason also exited the same point as Joe. So we can move on with Rashad's presentation.
Okay, then next slide, please. This other issue was regarding text in section 311 regarding ordering for RPC input. I think it was Martin who made the point that it's not just RPC, it's action, and we have to refer to not just input, again output. We have to update the draft. A side note on this was Rob was asking questions about what happens with augments, and looks like there's potential existing issues with augments since the order is not predictable, but that's not something which is being brought because of this draft. It's just something which came up. Next slide, please. Okay, this one was regarding interpreting revision labels as Yang semantic version numbers. Martin made the point, well, if my project uses something which is similar to Semver and could be interpreted as Yang semantic version, but is not one, then that wouldn't work. So it looks like what we have right now is potentially too restrictive, and what we mentioned on the mailing list is we will look into having another statement extension to specify the versioning scheme, and that issue would be addressed. So we need to do further work on this.
Rob is in queue.
So as a contributor, one of my thoughts here is I think when we looked at this before, one issue with having an extra statement is then being able to define the set of different versioning schemes. Initially, you might think you're using identities, but that obviously doesn't work in the Yang language as opposed to as instance data. So one option may be for each versioning scheme to define its own extension, saying you're using this versioning scheme.
Yep, I agree.
Just remind everyone of an earlier comment of when we broke this apart. We said at some point we need to ask the question of, do we want to allow for multiple versioning schemes or not? And I think we can still go forward and continue thinking of that question as the documents progress.
Okay, next slide, please, if there's no more questions in this.
Jason just jumped in to queue. You haven't really started the slide. Jason, you want to go?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was on the previous one. I guess I think we some of the authors were good with the concept of different versioning schemes, but I think it would be fairly useful if we find a way to kind of have a preferred scheme if we can get ourselves there, and what this point about is kind of saying, look, if there's a certain pattern for numbers like major dot minor dot editorial, a three-digit number scheme, it would be very helpful, I think, for the industry that there's a standard, well-known interpretation of that pattern. In a way, I guess what I recommend is if we can find a way that we reserve that pattern for a well-known scheme, I think it would be useful for everyone. Like, you don't want to have to guess that 1.2.3 could be this scheme or could be that scheme.
As long as you can use one scheme or the other, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I think what we'd probably want to aim for as a group is that we reserve the 1.2.3 pattern as meaning something specific, and no other scheme could use exactly that pattern. They'd have to prepend it with a prefix or have some other way of making it very intuitively obvious to a human that it's a different scheme.
Yeah, further discussion needed, I think.
Ready for the next slide?
Martin has a question, I think.
Martin, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if we end up with Yang-Semver being experimental, we can't really say that 1.2.3 means Yang-Semver, I think. So I think that perhaps this discussion is a bit dependent on that outcome.
Good point.
From my standpoint, I think the documents continue as they are up until the point that the working group decides that we're ready for last call, and then we can revisit whether they should move from proposed standard to experimental. You know, that's generally what happens with documents that end up experimental. Is it's not until the working group decides that it's done, that there's agreement that what's being proposed is not sufficiently mature or well understood for it to be a proposed standard. So I think it's reasonable to consider that, to go down the track that we're going down the track of as adopted, until the working group says, yeah, we need to, we're done working on it and it's not good enough for proposed standard.
There's questions from Tim and Balazs. I feel I'm acting as chair.
The chairs are trying to take notes at the same time.
Right.
But also, it's your presentation, so that's okay.
So this is Tim Carey. I think I would like to just make sure that everyone knows that, from the standpoint of the versioning, I kind of agree with Jason in the sense that I know for the open source community, as well as that stands for, at least from the broadband forum community, we would prefer to see a pattern there so that we can put our tooling around this and in order to do some comparisons of modules and make some decisions around it. So the pattern would be important so that we can recognize the what's going on and make decisions.
Next in queue is Blush.
I think we should explicitly state whatever the revision label is using, what schema. It doesn't cost a lot and it makes life easier. And then we can later on debate whether experimental or RFC. Did you hear me this time?
Yeah, we heard you. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with what Balazs said. I mean, if we find a way to explicitly specify what scheme we're using, it would really help. If we're done with this, can go on slide, was that slide 6? Did I talk about slide 6? Can you go back to slide 6, please? Yeah, this, okay, this is quick. Yeah, basically there was some clarification regarding submodules use of version. Can it conflict? Does it have a relationship with the module version? It does not. So we just need to update the draft to clarify that. Next slide, please. So the draft currently says that, we use the @ revision label, which replaces @date. And Martin made the comment that tools which look for the date, would break because of this. The reason we did this was not to break the tools, but basically if a module is using a revision label, it should be, that module should be searchable, importable by that revision label. So if we go back, if we just put date there, then we cannot, do that by revision label. Something I think Joe had brought up initially in the design team discussions was whether, we should be using a different delimiter for the revision label. That's a potential solution that could still break the tools, or the tools would have to be modified. I'm not sure. We need further discussion on this. There's no questions. Next slide. The new extension status description. So the comment was made that this is not necessary, that we can kind of update, well, we can just update the description of the data node instead. The reason this was done was, as we're saying here, is that it's a workaround for description of the status, which is not allowed. So yes, you can change the description, but whenever you change the description, you have to figure out whether it's a user or tooling, whether the change is backwards compatible or non-backwards compatible. We may need to annotate the description change with, to identify that it's backwards compatible and stuff like that. So I don't think it's the most important question right now, and I think even within the now defunct design team, there is no consensus as to whether this is needed or not, but this just explains why that was added. We need to discuss further, and feedback from the working group would be good. Yeah, so the new leaf nodes deprecated and obsolete use empty. The comment was made would be better to be using Boolean instead. The authors are okay with using Boolean as long as the don't change when that node doesn't exist, we don't change the existing implementations that don't supply those leaf nodes. But from what I recall, there was no pushback on changing this to bool from empty. And next slide. Okay, this is it. That's basically the link for all the open issues for module revision handling.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next presenter is Joe Clark. I'm going to send a periodic update to the chat window about signing the blue sheets. If you haven't done that already, please do so.
Thank you, Kent. Rashad has kind of touched on a number of the issues that we're going to touch on here, but nonetheless, let's recap what Yang Simver means, what we mean by that. Not much has changed between the previous draft, and we'll jump right into the issues. So next slide, please. So as a recap, Yang Simver is designed or defined to be the full Simver 2.0.0 spec that you would see if you went to simver.org, with some additions. So this is a superset. If you were to choose to use the the Simver 2.0 scheme, it would be completely compatible with this. But as the disbanded design team talked about just incorporating Simver, early on, we ran into the issue that and Rob describes this very well, that if you've got a relatively stable branch, let's say your 1.0 branch, and you're iterating that 1.1, 1.1.1, 1.1.2, so on and so forth, and a customer comes and says, I really would like you to incorporate these features in the code train and of course the set of when it gets to a Yang module, a set of modules I'm using, but I don't want to upgrade to your next major version. So there could be this case where you have to backport a either non-backwards compatible change or even a backwards compatible change into this otherwise stable branch. And so we introduced, or we came up with this idea of this lowercase m, uppercase m notation, which signifies a poisoned, if you will, poisoned branch, meaning that at that point, the lowercase m signifies that a backwards compatible but major change, or I should say minor change, has been added, like a new feature has been added. And the uppercase m signifies that a non-backwards compatible change, major type revision change, has been added to this branch. And at that point, all bets are kind of off. That branch has been signified as being poisoned. We do not think, however, that would be that common of an occurrence. And as we'll talk about when we get to the issues, the intent is that and it's currently documented this way, that IETF would incorporate the use of Yang Simver as a revision label scheme. We've already kind of talked about some of those issues there. In addition, this draft talks about this idea of Yang artifacts and not just modules. It used to talk about just modules, but we decided when packages kind of evolved out of the design team work, we wanted a kind of a single noun that would represent being able to tie a Yang Simver to a Yang module as well as a Yang package. So that, if you read that, that's what that notation means. So we evolved the whole versioning thing to do what Rashad just talked about previously, using the revision history as a lineage. But for the purpose of a quick human readable, human understandable notation, we introduced this concept of a revision label. And as Rashad mentioned, we wanted something that kind of resonated with people, and we landed on Simver, which OpenConfig also uses. And because of this desire to do this multi-branching and the realization that not everything is perfect, we arrived on this notion of this lowercase and uppercase m. So that gives us Simver as it is today. And the one bullet I didn't really mention is, like full Simver 2.0.0, we also recognize that you can have a 0 major version, and that doesn't follow the backwards compatible, non-backwards compatible rules. So that is Simver as it is, as it's documented in the draft today. Next slide, please. Back in time. Okay, so this is just, I won't walk through this. This is just a visual example of how this works, where you have the beta 0 version, then you have an initial release. We talked about that recently on the list. The idea would be that Yang module kind of RFC press release would be 1.0.0, and then you can see how the branches might evolve and where those lowercase m, uppercase m notation could come into play because of that backporting of minor or major backwards compatible, non-backwards compatible fixes. And you can see otherwise how the revision label hierarchy or lineage would progress. Again, following, for the most part, the Simver 2.0.0 rules. Next slide, please. Okay, so the fun part are the issues. During the adoption call, and again, the issues have kind of been discussed already, thanks to Rashad bringing them up. The idea is, the question was posed, do we need the Simver notation? Because you can go back and look at the module revision history and determine that. Well, yes, tooling can do that, but that assumes some things. For example, that in order to make it easier, you have to include the entire revision history and do no culling in any new revision of the module. So that can get kind of bulky. And if you prune that, then you've got to go back and keep fetching older revisions until you can build that entire lineage. Whereas the idea of this this revision label here is that you come with two versions or two revisions of the same module, and you can, at a module perspective, between revision now and revision previous, and say, yes, this is either backwards compatible or non-backwards compatible, meaning a human can easily do that. This is something that is convenient for that operator, that consumer of the Yang module to look at and know that there are either non-backwards compatible changes and they can dig into that more deeply, or there aren't any non-backwards compatible changes. So my tooling, my consumption of that Yang module can continue to proceed normally. And so the proposal of the authors at this point is, yes, it is to define a revision label scheme, and we feel that there should be a some revision label that we go forward with as something that is documented and defined. Not to say that other producers of Yang modules can't define their own revision labels as well. I'll pause there because I know the mic line is building.
Carson? Is Carson on mute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So my general experience in life is that it's hard to have two things that differ in semantics and only differ in their case being used by humans. So if you think about the number of people who talk about millihertz when they mean megahertz, maybe it's not a good idea to use capital M and lowercase m for two different semantics. So maybe you should look out for a different character, different letter to use there instead of using the same letter twice.
That's a good point. I don't recall if we ever talked about the confusion, the example you brought up. We wanted something that that kind of we picked M because of major, minor. That's why, and that's why the lowercase for minor, the uppercase for major. But it's something that ultimately you get the point. We want to signify that this branch has something not just quite right with it based on the pure Simber rules. So it's certainly worth considering whether or not that's lowercase m, uppercase m, or some other more or less ambiguous notation.
Great, thank you.
I think that's the mic line. So next slide, please. I would say that that's something worth discussing and bringing up on the list so we could have a kind of master record of that, because I don't believe that proposal or that point has been raised before. So thanks, Karsten. Second issue raised during adoption, and Martin has now talked about this on this call, and Kent has also raised this. So the document currently mandates that the IETF modules will use Yang Simver in the revision label. And do we want to do this? And Martin mentioned that the intended status might dictate the answer to this, and I took the tack the other direction. If we answer this, then if we answer this in a positive, then we kind of know what we want to do with the intended status. If we answer this in the negative, then we can have that discussion of what the intended status should be. Thinking is, though, that Yang IETF or IETF Yang modules will typically not introduce non-backwards compatible changes. They could and almost certainly will introduce backwards compatible changes. So they should conform to the pure Simver 2.0.0 rules. So the complexity, the uppercase, lowercase m goes away. You probably would just have a 1.0.1.x stream of modules. And the module revision history will capture that lineage. That said, the authors feel that we should say that we mandate this for IETF modules for the point I raised on the previous slide, that the convenience factor for the consumer of the Yang modules can quickly see that module foo now is got a minor version of bump. So there are new features that might be worth exploring and seeing if there's something that I could consume or use differently. So we feel that this is still something that's useful to have for IETF Yang modules.
Couple questions in the queue.
Yep.
IDR working group. Who is IDR?
Yeah, that's me. That's Sue Hairs. I've brought this up that this is the point where I think that I'm not sure we're going to get modules in some of the BGP features which won't have non-backward compatible features. But I'll take that offline. I just want to point, this is the, because I mentioned it on the mail list during adoption. I just want to point to this is the place where that's the reason I made that comment.
Thanks, Sue. Before we go to the next one, I'll just answer really quickly. I did say typically, and I guess I probably should have said we don't anticipate the complex branching like the EM. So if you had to do a BGP 2, the Semver 2.0.0 base scheme would support that. And I'll shut up and go back to the mic line.
Luke is next.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is counter to your response to Sue, but I definitely agree with Sue that non-backward compatible changes are going to happen. And in fact, I think introducing the work that we're doing here will make it more common. And we also have an existence proof that the IETF will do non-backward compatible changes, because if you remember, we had an instance of that already.
Yeah, true. I think it was the L3SM module.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the requirements that one of the items that drove one of the requirements. So I'm not sure we really know what the frequency will be, but it'll be greater than 1. We'll do it.
Next in queue is Balazs.
I think if we can use the same schema both for standards and for our own products, Ericsson products, that would be very, very useful. And this is something that a number of vendors would need. Also, I will have later a presentation about 3GPP and Yang. Some other standard organizations don't take backwards compatibility so strictly, and they will need this as well, probably. Thanks.
Next in queue is Italo.
Thank you. I think, yes, I think I also would like to have this schema in IETF, because I see some cases, for example, even if everything is backward compatible and linear, you may have, for example, the 100 in ISG and the 110 in the working group process. So then if you don't have this rule, I'm a little bit confused how you can have this progressing together.
Well, the revision label is that human label. It's a tag that is consumable by the or usable by the consumer of the Yang module. The draft that Rashad presented on Yang module versioning describes the canonical way one would use to use the lineage of the Yang module and the BC NBC tags to figure out the true nature of where they're at. But that as a human is kind of convoluted. So this gives that quick vision confirmation between two revisions of a module, whether or not one can expect backwards compatible or non-backwards compatible or editorial changes.
Next in queue is Charles.
Yeah, so when we say Yang modules would typically not introduce non-backward compatible changes, but we conform to the Semver rule, what I'm assuming is for IETF modules, we would never poison a branch, right? We would decide not to do that. we wouldn't make use of that kind of added thing that we're putting in for vendors to help with their use cases. So we would make use, if we had to, we'd make a non-backward compatible change, but then we would bump the major version rather than putting an M, capital M. Is that, am I understanding correctly?
That's what I was trying to convey. Echo. That's what I was trying to convey here.
Okay,
Yes.
great. That makes a lot of sense.
Next in queue is Jason.
Hi. I guess I'm not sure I'm fully in line, Joe. I think typically, yes, there would be a pretty strong attempt to not use the M in IETF modules, but as Sue brought up, there may be examples of branching in standards modules, and that does mean there is a possibility that in a older branch, it's possible there could be a decision in the future to make a non-backwards compatible change in that older version. If that happens, not that we want to encourage it, but if it happens, then at least this modified SEMVer gives us a mechanism to show that that happened.
Next in queue is Rob.
And it encourages it.
Try to cut the queue line. That's okay. We'll, Rob, and then we'll cut the queue line here for this slide.
As a contributor, I just had a thought on Italo's comment about drafts being worked in the working group going to the ISG in terms of version numbers. I understand how that works quite well for a module that's before 1.0.0. That's fine. When we are doing new revisions, that could be an issue. But I do know that SEMVer also allows descriptions to be added after the main version numbers. So I think we could potentially look as to whether there could be some appropriate strings to use after the SEMVer version numbers to see to describe documents that are in progress effectively. So I think that would be worth looking at. And that's part of the standard SEMVer 2.0.0 rule. So it's not a new rule we'd be adding.
I can't tell if Martin was in queue or not, but go ahead, Martin.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to point out again that the mechanism that makes all these things that people are asking for possible is the other draft, the modular versioning draft. So when you say that, oh, we need non-backwards compatible, even though we don't encourage it, it's the modular versioning draft that allows that. This draft is just a symbolic string for the version.
Thanks for the comments. Just keep going. Thank you. Next slide. So now we're into our GitHub issues, and Rashad posted the link. He filtered on module versioning, but all of the issues are there. We have tags for various ones. Number 48 happens to be that, and Rashad touched on this a little bit as well. Right now, the pattern defined for revision label for Yang SEMVer is very specific and matches on the 2.0.0 rules, including the extra pre-release and build nomenclature that Rob just mentioned, plus our MM, lowercase m, uppercase m notation. So the draft states that anything that matches that must be interpreted using the rules that we described already on the second slide. And then it's already been raised, well, what if I want to use something that looks like a SEMVer, but I want to use different rules? Like a vendor might have a release version that looks very much like a SEMVer, but they don't follow the strict major means, non-backwards compatible, so on and so forth. Martin, I believe, brought up that this was kind of a layer violation on the list. And so it's already been discussed, we could have additional metadata that indicates the scheme being used, or we could have required that different revision label schemes define different extension points to, again, unambiguously state that this is the scheme being used for the label, and then there are pointers to how the label should be processed. Ultimately, the authors want something that is unambiguous. And Tim, on this call, brought up that the pattern makes sense. You can look at that and say, okay, it matches this, so these are the rules we're going to use. But we want to make sure that that if we are going to say that the revision label matches, that if the revision label matches its pattern rules, this is in addition to mandating that IETF modules use this, it's going to go towards that final document status. So the authors still feel that this makes sense, but all we really want is that unambiguous nature of describing what rules to use or how one should interpret that revision label. Okay, next slide, please. That was the last of the major issues. So the big driving issue here is, before we get to intended status, the authors wanted to answer of the kind of the normative language. Do we mandate that IETF modules use Simver as Yang Simver as a versioning scheme? And then how do we interpret that? Is it the pattern, or do we need something else? And that's the discussion and the question we need to answer here. And then we can move on to, based on that, to what do we want to do from an intended status of this document. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Joe. And Bo, your next presenter, I see Lou already has the slides queued up. Please go ahead.
We are going to start running out of time if we want to hit other topics.
Oh, are you there? I do not see him on mute.
Okay.
Or her.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm going to present the main updates and some open issues to the Yang packages. So next slide, please. I hope you can hear me clearly. First, I'm going to give a quick overview. As Rob presented in versioning solution overview, Yang packages is a versioning at a much higher level than the individual module. So the goal of the Yang packages definition is to provide a more concise and more concise way for a client to confirm with the Yang schema on the device. For example, the set of Yang modules to implement layer 2 VPN on the device could be defined as a Yang package. And in addition to the running server solution, offline use case are also considered. So that's the reason why Yang package instance file are defined. So then what's the main definition of Yang package? I think the first one is package version. A package version is a mandatory. And it could be used either revision label and also revision date. And the just discussed Yang version can also be used, so that means. And another characteristic is package hierarchical. That means package can include other packages. And the last definition shown here is the checksum. The checksum definition in the Yang package is for the integrity checks, which is to solve integrity problems when downloading a package from an URL. So here, this is the quick overview. Next slide, please. So here are the main updates since last meeting. The first one is Yang package now has its own top-level container definition. In the previous version, Yang package definition is under the Yang library. Try to reusing the module sets defined definition in the Yang library. And that the second major change is a new section is added to describe how Yang package and data store schema and then provide guidance to this. The third one is quite related to the first one, since the Yang package core Yang package definition on the server and offline Yang distance are unified, so the core part are redefined. And the last one is similar with I just mentioned before. It could be a revision label and or a date. So this is the main update. So next, please.
Jason, do you have a question? Jason, you're in queue.
It was actually to address Lou's point about time constraints. I know we started off the meeting thinking we're going to have lots of time, but we are chewing through it quickly. At this point, our X-Design team has taken an hour, and we still have several drafts to go. So I was gonna propose one of two options and see what people think. We had already discussed this amongst the authors that we definitely wanted to get through these first three drafts in detail, up to including packages. Based on the priority of how we want to work in the working group, probably the next two ones, my presentation and Rashad's, we could either extremely abbreviate, as in maybe do the 5-minute version, touch on a couple of slides, or even push to the end of the session if there's time. I don't know what the feeling is from other people, but I'd suggest maybe we do a very abbreviated version of the next two presentations, and the chairs can kind of cut us off if
Thanks, Jason.
so that we can get to the topics.
Yeah, Lou and I will sidebar that and get back to you when your present starts. Please.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay, so this is the Yang package model structure. This is the new structure. The left one is actually taken out from the Yang package instance. It's a similar one, but the point here is that now this is the common package definition for both on the Yang instance data file and also the device. So you can see on the left, on the right, the Yang packages container just uses grouping directly. So in that way, the Yang instance looks very the unified version. And we also changed the package association to the data store schema as for the Yang library augmentation. In previous one, there's a lot of reusing the module sets definition to relate to associate to the packages, but right now this is the only left part is to associate the package to the data store schema. And the previous version, this package to the schema mapping is 1-to-1. In this version, it's 1-to-n mapping. In that way, it would be very, I think in that way, it will be more compatible with the Yang schema selection. So next slide, please. So I just to talk about this, already touch about this. You can see that we already unified the definition for the device and also the Yang instance data file. Here's the other consideration that in this way, Yang list, package list may include multiple versions of a particular package in that way, if the server can capable server support several versions, then it could be showed here using package list. And if the other thought is when using packages, Yang library could clients may generally use packages instead of module sets. So here's this is a thinking about package definition, just separated from the Yang library. So next step, please. And for the package and data store relationship, NETMOD already defines different data store, and each with the different associated data store schemas. And in our discussion, we think there could be many ways that data store schema could be represented using packages. So we give some recommendation how packages could be used to define data store schemas. Since packages are mostly used for package conformance between clients and device. So with this mapping, then that will be more efficient. So we give the two major suggestions on the package definition to the data store. One is data store level packages. For the operational data store, that schema must include all packages for all the configuration data stores. And any data store that exactly have the same data store must use the same package. In that way, the package definition could be more simplified. And the common packages should be used for those parts of the different data store schemas, that part common between data stores. So this is also the new major changes. And next, please. So here are all the major open issues we bring up from the GitHub. This is not the exhaust list, but we think it's more useful to hear the feedback from the working group. Next slide, please. The first one is the revision date of the Yang module in Yang package definition. So right now, Yang doesn't require Yang module revision date to be mandatory, but for package, it has to be specified a revision date to guarantee its exact schema definition, so that in that way, client and server can have a fully conformance be made. One option discussed before is to define the behavior if a module revision is not specified. For example, when it matches module with no revision date, how to define that behavior. And another related question is also, is it okay for namespace to be optional? Right now it's mandatory in Yang library, but in package, namespace is optional. So here's our proposal. We in package require every module has a revision date, but keep the XML namespace as optional. So we'd like to hear if working group can give us some feedback on this issue.
Given the time, we'd like to have the comments sent to the list, but we'll note that we really do want feedback. We really do want feedback from the working group.
Okay. Okay. So next, please. another one is not very very important, but we also like to hear the feedback from the working group. Is now Young package draft allows a timestamp to be associated with a document. But the question is, should the package have a timestamp or a date? The argument is that packages could potentially update more quickly than modules, like when they were automatically built at the output, and perhaps revision date is sufficient. Like we can, like package version can use revision date as a version, so identify a package. So we think our proposal is retain timestamp to avoid any potential confusion with the revision date used as a package version. So if there any feedback on this, we'd like to hear from the working group. Next, please. The other one, I think, is already raised also in the last meeting. This is quite a hard one, but if there are any feedback on this, we will welcome the feedback. For now, the young package definition, we think that ANA registration for young package definition is quite useful, but we think should this just cover IETF standardized young packages or all young packages? Or does IANA manage the package revision? Or should we try and just use something like GitHub with some expert review or release process? So we are not sure about this, and we are seeking suggestions from the working group. So I think this is the end for this presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. The chair sidebarred decided to move forward with the remaining two presentations, but we accept Jason's suggestion to abbreviated presentation. So Jason, and after Jason, Rashad, if you could keep it to the minimum. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to keep it super short. So flip to slide 3, please. So just a reminder of what this presentation is about, schema selection. So this is a functionality, it's mainly server-based functionality with some minimal extensions on the client side. Basically, servers can support multiple kind of versions of a schema or multiple schemas and advertise those, and then the client can decide which one they want to use. So as an example here, you have vendor modules version 6.0.1, you have vendor modules version 5.2.3. The server, the router could advertise these, and the client, if it had previously integrated with the old version 5, could request and select and say, hey, I want to keep talking to this upgraded server, but I want to keep on using the old versions 5.2.3. And the clients can ask that. There is a default schema set if a client doesn't request anything. So for clients that don't know about this whole schema selection process, they could just connect and they would use a default schema, which is configurable on the server side if desired. And schema sets are basically built up of Yang packages. And I'll show that if you skip to slide 6, how that kind of looks. So this is an illustration of what the basic unit of selection is. So a client selects a schema set, and on the right, this illustrates what a schema set looks like. It's basically each data store has a list of packages. So packages are associated with a data store, and you kind of define which packages are part of each data store, and that makes up a schema set. You'll notice here in the example at the top, I have my running and candidate. You'll notice the same packages are defined for the running and candidate, which hopefully makes a lot of sense. And then Similarly, both of those packages, vendor config 312 and 252, you'll notice they also show up in the operational data store. Because with the NMDA architecture, you want to be able to read back the operational version of those configuration models. So hopefully this gives a bit of an idea of what a schema set means. You define the packages for each data store that you support. Okay, and then to make this very brief, I'm going to skip to slide 13 and highlight really the one key issue. We'll have to follow up on the list with other issues. But the one key issue, I think, is where should this document live, NETMOD versus NetConf? So this draft does define some updates to NetConf. They're not huge, but it's during the kind of the capabilities exchange flow. The hello has a new advertisement, and the client can, there's some semantics there for a client to select, optionally select which schema set it wants to use. Similarly, there's some extensions for RESTconf where the RESTconf URI kind of encodes the desired schema set. So, you know, there's some thoughts here that this draft should possibly move to the NetConf working group. And the second part of that is whether we want to actually split the document or keep it together. The possible split would be to put protocol changes and so focus really narrowly on exactly just the NetConf protocol changes in one document, just the RESTconf protocol changes in another document, and then a third document that has the stuff that's not really protocol specific, that talks about how schema sets are built and configured, etc. So our proposal from the X design team, the authors, is it's probably most simple to keep it all together as one document, but address it in NetConf. But we're open to discussion about this. I don't know if there's any comments on that now or something we just take to the list.
This is Kent as chair of both working groups. And I think that this a similar discussion will be occurring on Monday's NetConf meeting. So maybe we can also take it up there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I have a few more minutes for this presentation at the NetConf session. So I'll get a little bit more into some of the other slides in that session. Other than that, if people aren't attending NetConf, they can look at these slides and see some of the key changes and issues for this draft, and we'll follow up on the list. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Next is Rashad, and Rashad, if you could also keep it to the abbreviated presentation.
Yeah, just as I'm bringing that up, a comment on that last one. I think the chairs will also talk about how best to coordinate between the groups. And we might end up taking you up on the idea of a split, but you know, we'll have to see how the discussions go.
Okay, slide 2, please. Okay, so quickly on the what. So basically, this defines optional extensions to annotate changes which could be ambiguous to improve the accuracy of comparison. For let's say what this draft is, it basically describes algorithms to compare Yang modules to be able to figure out whether changes they're backwards compatible or not. Let's jump to slide 5, where there's this very simple example. Here, as you can see, so I mean, description changes can be backwards compatible or not, depending on whether you're changing the actual semantics. So in this case, it's just, stuff is written with one F in the initial version, and you see here the second F was added, and we have the annotation to say that this is an editorial change. Next, please. This one provides an example where the container foo was renamed as bar, and here we say, hey, bar was renamed from foo. just to give some extra indication as to what the non-backwards compatible change was. Next slide, please. So very quickly, stuff we need to discuss. This draft is probably the greenest of all the drafts in that series. So I'd really like to hear from the working group, especially people who worked on tooling. You know, questions, should we move all the extensions to the module versioning? There's pros and cons. The extension for NBC, are they useful? The X-Design team believe it is useful. We've got various questions on rename from. Should we be able to provide a revision label? Should we be able to support rename move between modules and things like that? So there's quite a few questions, which it all depends on how people feel those are common and whether we need to address all the corner cases or whether we go for the majority of the cases we have to handle. Anyway, so the whole point of this, to summarize, is to help with tooling to compare between versions. One other thing which I think Rob had brought up last IETF is whether we have to settle on a particular tool. I don't know how the working group feels about that, or whether we go with all our various tools we have today and hope that, you know, one or more do support this functionality. And this is it from me.
Thanks, Rashad. Next, we have Chen Wu, who's going to present two presentations. And Chen, if there's a way to do an abbreviated form, that would be great.
So if you're not talking, please mute your mic, and I'll do it for you.
Chen, we can't hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes. This is Chen Wu. I'm here to discuss the ECA policy model draft update. Actually, I see Igor and Xuefeng online. Actually, so it's good to get together to discuss this. And so the name we listed here is also this draft. Next slide. Yeah. So this draft has been around for a while. Actually, the version 5 actually was presented in the last Singapore meeting, and actually agreed to adopt this work as working group draft. But the chair suggests that we should be independent from management plan protocol like NETCOP, RESCOP. So so we made a new revision in version 6. We actually try to address this, and so chair agreed to start the working group call in February 18. Actually, there's a lot of discussion, and we also have a lot of discuss about this open issue, and there's some suggestion from the list, especially from the Yugen and Andy. And Yugen think that we should have more clear young definition. So probably we need to address this. It is a minor issue, and but people have a lot of concern about this condition expression, how to represent the condition expression or logical expression, especially you engage with like a logical or mathematical expression. So it's very complicated. So based on the many discussion, actually, Andy, especially Andy, actually he suggested maybe we can use the XPath function or XPath expression for this logical expression. And we also discussed a lot about how to represent the ECA, whether we should fully represent the ECA model or not. So in latest version we made, we actually harmonized with Igor's draft, and we add additional attribute like a policy variable function call, and also RPC, etc. Actually, so we also actually try to actually define clearly about what is the event, what is the condition, what is the action, and we introduce the key element like a policy variable, and also we decouple this ECA model from network protocol, make it more generic, can be applicable to many other managing protocols. So for this ECA model, for people who don't know what ECA model is doing, actually, this model actually I think is a very important component actually for the network automation. It really can help you to delegate some network control from the client to the server to allow the server self-management and provide quick response to the event. So this is the basic idea. So go to the next slide. So the major issue we need to address actually for this draft is about how to represent the ECA in YANG. And so the challenge is if we use YANG object to fully represent the ECA component like event, condition, action, policy variable. So there's a lot of lot of issue we need to address actually. So people think of big challenges about the logic expression. So especially as you mentioned, when you decompose this logic expression into a set of the YANG list, is very difficult to do. So what they suggest actually is use XPath for this logic expression. And we also find actually policy variable is very useful, especially when you maintain some state. We can use, so probably we can actually use XPath to reference the policy variable in the expression. Based on Andy's suggestion, he also thinks we should take a look at the alarm model that already be published as of say. And in the alarm model, they also have alarm notification event. So probably whether we should reuse this kind of notification event or we define totally new event. So this is something we need to figure out. We also haven't reached agreement on this, but I think probably we need to take a look at this. Also for server actually, especially when server support ECA, the ECA capable server need to support a sufficient degree of XPath decompression. Also, they may need to support a general purpose scripting environment such as Python or other script. So the proposal from us that we think we should provide a universal ECA representation, and then they can actually be populated into the server. The server can convert into the microscript. Use this proposal, we can address some of the issue raised in the adoption call. Comments?
Yeah, so Joel Yeagley, one of the chairs. I think one of the challenges that we experienced in the adoption call is that there definitely is some opposition to adopting it as it's written today, and I think that's a relatively serious challenge to the question of whether we can advance it in this working group at this point.
Yeah,
I think Andy's criticism is like particularly relevant in that context, but I kind of like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for the comments. Actually, I think Igor, we take Igor and us and take a lot of time to discuss with Andy. I think based on the many discussion, we reach a lot of agreement, and Andy also suggests a lot of input. Actually, definitely we need to think about that. So our plan is to rework this draft, and we also also actually we will work with Hang because and what he suggests, maybe we should create a GitHub and to work together, try to address the major issue, and we can move on. So that's the work plan from the author side.
Yeah, I mean, because if an 07 draft addresses Andy's major criticisms, I mean, I think that would be something that we could consider, like polling for adoption again. As it stands now, I don't think 06 is something that we can advance.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Any other comments from Igor and Chevron?
Let's move to the next presentation. And Jen, if you can keep it to 5 minutes, please. We're running out of time.
Okay.
I know you have 9 slides, so.
Okay, this is Qing. Yeah, I will try to be quick actually. Yeah, given the limited time actually. So this is Qing Wang. Actually, I will present this telemetry data tagging draft, and the name listed here are also this draft. And next. So this is not a new draft that we already presented. This idea in last IETF meeting, and one of the issues we discussed is how this relates to the notification capability draft. So we the change we made actually we try to align with that draft, and we clarify the use cases. We define the telemetry data tagging parameter. Add a lot of additional parameters, try to support a multi-dimensional operational data classification. And in registration and the model, we add a lot of new elements. Next. So why we write this job actually? I think in IETF they already developed a large number of device model and network element model. So we can use this device model as a data source. If we capture all the operation data from this device model, actually, this may cause a massive data connection and processing in the network side. Also, from the connector point of view, when connector establishes connection with the device, what is connector should do for the next step is to figure out what kind of telemetry data they can connect from the device. So usually they rely on the pre-configured separation policy or selection filter to do that. How do you specify this selection filter or separation policy? You usually specify the NMS or can be instructed by the device. So our idea is related to the second, the later case. Next. So what we try to do is we define the telemetry data tagging mechanism to try to capture the characteristic data, such as the performance memory data, and we can allow the device to advertise this telemetry data tag to the NMS or connector, so the connector or NMS can know what kind of telemetry data they really want to connect. So when all the interesting data are exported to the NMS or connector, we can leverage this, can provide a multiple dimensional network visibility analysis. So the bigger benefit is we can identify the performance memory related data for service assurance application. In addition, we can provide network visibility to several categories of data, such as network node, traffic flow, capacity. Next. So what telemetry data tagging look like? How do you classify these telemetry data tags? We actually, list 4 important telemetry data tag. Actually, the first important tag is we call the OPM tag. The OPM actually is abbreviation of the object type property metric, and this OPM tag can help to capture the performance memory related data to represent the object type attribute and performance metric related to the young data node or a set of young data node. In addition, we can provide the fine granularity OPM tag such as OPM type tag. Actually, use this tag, if you connect the performance metric value, you can indicate, oh, this metric value, for example, latency is maximize the value or minimize the value. Also, we can, indicate the metric scale or metric precision. The second category, the tag we provide is service tag. Actually, we can use service tag, for some young data node, they can be used for multiple purposes. So we can use this service tag to describe each purpose. For example, air survey PN service or tunnel service. And the third category we call the data source type. We can identify different data source type that relate to the connectivity, resource, hardware. And the last tag we provide, we call the parent grouping. This is something related to the multi-source aggregation. So when you connect the performance metric from different sources like a 9-card or different separate interface, you really want to know which performance metric from which source are grouped together or correlated together. So we can use this parent grouping tag to do that. Next. So how do we use this telemetry data tag? So typically, in this case, it's actually we actually provide how to use the OPM tag. Actually, with the OPM tag, you can actually tag a hardware model, alarm model, ACL model, interface model to capture the performance memory related data to classify them into object type, property, metric. So we can provide a multi-dimensional telemetry data classification. So this OPM tag can tag the operation state in or data object in the device model, and we can, advertise this telemetry data tag to the connector or NMS. So NMS can know so what kind of telemetry data they really want to subscribe or connect. So in this case, we can provide a multi-dimensional telemetry data analysis. So we gave this example. Actually, this
just one
data analysis. Okay. Next. The second case is about a multi-source aggregation. Actually, when you connect the performance metric like latency from line count 1, line count 2, maybe in the same network element A, so you really want to know which the latency from which line count can group together. So you can use this kind of parent grouping tag to do that. Next. So this is a model structure we proposed. Well, what we do is we augment a module tag model, which has already published or moved to the RFQ, and we can augment with additional data node entry. We can provide this 4-category telemetry data tag we listed here. Yeah. Next. So we think that the key value for this telemetry data tag is that we can use them to identify performance memory related data. I think the most important thing is that you have large amount of device model, you have many data objects you are interested in. You use this telemetry data tagging, you can know how to correlate data object in different models together, so they can provide a good network insight to this telemetry data. So we think it's a very useful work. We would like a working group to consider to adopt this. That's all.
So this is the normal point where we'd ask for a hum or hands for those of us who don't hear so well. I think we'll try to do that on the list and gauge interest of the working group there, and then move forward from there.
Okay.
Great. And the next presenter is Balazs.
Do you hear me?
5 minutes if you can.
Yes, we hear you. 5 minutes, please.
This is not a proposal for work. This is just background information of what's happening out in the world. I'm working both in IETF and also in 3GPP, which defines the are mobile networks, and the O&M for our mobile networks. 3GPP has recently, or in the last year, adopted Yang and NetConf in a big way. Next, please. Next slide, please. A bit of background how 3GPP is working. They define everything in so-called stage 1, 2, 3 solutions. Stage 1 and 2 basically states how the functionality should work. Stage 3 gives you a precise definition that you can really code against. Currently, stage 3, there are Yang NetConf, JSON schema, and an XML schema solution set that are being defined for 5G networks. Next slide, please. So I was very heavily involved. No, okay. How they are defining this? They use UML, which is object-oriented and has many different tools. They have restricted UML. However, they use figures and plain text English for defining their models, which is why they need something more precise like JSON schema or even better Yang. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, I have been heavily involved in how to map these object-oriented UML models into Yang. There have been actually multiple efforts around this. Ours might be one of the bigger ones. We produced one specification that defines how the mapping is done. Some parts of it is rather straightforward. So an object becomes a grouping inside the list, an attribute becomes a leaf. But some parts are quite complicated, like how do you model inheritance? Inheriting attributes is easy, but inheriting containment is very, very tricky. Also, attributes, what they call attribute, can be still a big structure. It can be a simple string, but it can be a structure, including a structure of strings and integers and whatever. Next slide, please. This is just an example of how the mapping is done. We have here classes, an abstract class that only has a grouping defining a few leaves. We have a managed element that will be a concrete class. It inherits from the abstract class, and then it is really instantiated in this list of managed elements, and it also has contained classes. This is the simple case. Next slide, please. So containment can be very tricky. They have, first of all, recursive containment, which can be mapped to something like a list in IETF interface. What is much more troublesome is containment by inheritance. When an abstract class contains other classes, and then suddenly a lot of other classes inherit from the abstract class. And suddenly you say that, okay, I modify the abstract class. So anyone who has inherited from the abstract class needs to modify their containment structure. This is like if we could modify or augment a grouping, which we don't allow. They allow similar things. Next slide, please. Addressing is rather different, and we have to come to a compromise on this. They're using something called distinguished names, which LDAP also uses. They have used it for a long time, so they will not change for Yang's sake. And also distinguished names are a network level hierarchy. So it's not just the Yang server or the NetConf server they're addressing, but they can address which NetConf server, which network system they're using with. On the other hand, DNs lack a lot of data, like namespace, multiple keys, and such. So the mapping is non-trivial. Next, please.
1 minute.
Yeah, next slide. They have default values, but they really mean something different from what we have. They are invariant variables, which cannot be changed once they have been really created. And they have system-created objects, so read-only objects, read-only lists that can contain configurable leaves. And yes, we don't like this. We decide not to do this, but this system also works. It has been working for 20 years. Next slide, please. We have defined the modeling methodology, and we have these two specifications. Together, they contain some 70 Yang models. They are available and released already. Next slide, please. They are handling all these Yang models in Microsoft Word documents, which is a terrible, terrible idea, but it's not the 3GP, the only one who has this crazy idea. One interesting point is that they have a full release every 18 months, and they don't consider backwards compatibility so important, which is very strange for me, but yeah, that's what they do. Next slide, please. Yeah, they also accepted the usage of NetConf protocol, but with Yang push, we have great problems. We might get it accepted, but as it was quite late, it might not be accepted after all. Next slide, please. Okay, that's it. If anyone is interested, I'm one of the main Yang guys there, so please contact me. Yanlin, but help me somewhat as well. Thank you.
Okay, now last presentation from Gorka.
Yes, thank you. So this is a really quick heads up of what's going on over in the core working group. There is a gang of 5, which is on this slide that is creating a way to do Yang in a constraint space. Next slide, please. So basically, the idea is that in the constraint space, we like binary information. So we represent Yang in CBOR. We like short identifiers. So we have a way to map Yang item identifiers into numbers, which we call SIDs. And we are using CoAP instead of HTTP. But apart from that, it looks a lot like RESTconf. So this is a whole set of documents that works together, which is why this took a while to complete. But parts of the whole suite may be useful for other applications. So maybe if you just need a binary form of Yang, you can just use the CBOR Yang part and then optionally SIDS. So this is has now completed working group last call in the core working group, and we have notified NETMOD and NetConf of that. Next slide. So the people you want to talk to probably are the authors, which are down at the bottom of the slide. I happen to be the document shepherd because I was a working group chair at the time when we did the working group last call. Core is now chaired by Jaime Jimenez and Marco Tiloca, and the responsible AD for the core working group is Barry Lieber. I'm just mentioning this in case you need to talk to people as opposed to an anonymous mailing list. Next slide. There are 4 documents. Yang CBOR is pretty much fully cooked. So it doesn't hurt if more people look at that, but I do not expect big problems turning up there anymore. SID is a pretty aggressive way to encode Yang item identifiers, so that's interesting. And please do have a look at the allocation process we came up with. Then we have something that's pretty core specific, which is the mapping to CoAP. But of course, that still needs to be NetConf compatible in some way, or RESTconf compatible. And finally, the youngest member is Yang library definition that is kind of a constrained version of 8525. And part of the discussion right now is, do we actually need that constrained version or not? And then, of course, the second question is, how does it look like? Next slide. So we have completed the working group last call. We have a number of open issues. This slide lists maybe the 5 more important ones, but I won't really have time to go into that. Next slide and last slide. given the working group last call is now done, the next steps are likely to be that the authors process these comments, generate new versions of the 4 drafts, and that's for the chairs to decide. But I would expect that we will have a second working group last call. And if you missed the first one, please do have a look at the second working group last call. And we do plan to ship to the ISG at the end of this month. So this will not be an endless story. This will go to the ISG soon. I'm done.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We've made it just in time. And so we will be posting a follow-up, the recording of the session and the minutes and also the data tracker, all the slides we posted there. And if there's any remaining conversation that was taken to list, let's please do that. And stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Thank you.